and welcome back to Mads World. I'm your host Mads, and I hope you've been enjoying the show so far. If you have, please remember to subscribe, rate and review the podcast on your favourite listening platform or share with a mate. This week, in the wake of the record-breaking success of Channel 4's program It's a Sin, we're discussing living with HIV and the stigma surrounding it. If you haven't yet watched It's a Sin, it's a beautiful but devastating series depicting a group of tight-knit, queer friends living through the HIV and AIDS crisis in the 80s. The show starts out as a fun coming-of-age drama that explores identity, finding your tribe, and the chaotic journey that is your sexual discovery in your 20s. However, it takes a horrific turn as HIV begins to migrate from the US and London becomes a hotspot where the show is set. We see the brutal reality of the AIDS epidemic and the harsh, inhumane way that queer people, mostly gay men, were treated as a result. The series has thrown the stigma of HIV and AIDS into the public eye, and joining me up next is a really special guest, Luke Kelly. After watching It's a Sin, Luke was inspired to reveal his HIV status on Instagram through a video that has since received almost 60,000 views. David Furnish, chair of the Elton John AIDS Foundation and husband to Elton John, responded through BBC News saying to Luke, "You are the most robust, happy, living example of what it's like to live with HIV nowadays. And you're so incredibly well informed about how the virus is transmitted and prevented and how well the drugs work." Up next, I'm delighted to welcome Luke Kelly to the podcast. Hello, Luke.
Hello, Maddie. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm really good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining the show. So, first up, let's just do a quick speed date round. So this is just so our listeners out there can sort of get to know you as a person, and then we can jump into story time and our question round. So
this is the bit I was scared about.
Really? Why were you so scared?
Not the other bit that we're going to actually talk about.
The get to know you questions. Okay, well, I guess our first question is, so this is I did a little bit of an introduction before, but our first question is, what inspired you to start talking about your journey of being HIV positive?
Cool. Well, yeah, it was mainly just from watching It's a Sin. I basically sat down to watch the show, but kind of just thought I would be fine with it because I was diagnosed 10 years ago. Yeah. So I kind of I have become very accustomed to it, and it's part of my life, and I just got on with it. So I just kind of thought, obviously I thought I might be moved because I think anyone is by the show. Yeah. But it kind of it did have a very strong, I had a very strong reaction to it, and that made me question a lot of things. And there's a couple of scenes in the show which really do question, they make you question your own journey as even just as a gay person, not only as HIV positive, and what that meant. And it just made me reflect. And so that's why I kind of came to the decision that I wanted to sort of come out publicly about it. For sure.
And we can get into all of that later on, but this is a dating podcast, so the question stands: how long have you been single?
I've been single, well, officially for just a few months, actually. I had a slightly I was going to say weird, that's not the word, but it was like a long distance extended holiday affair, I would say.
Ooh, holiday romance. We love holiday romances at Mads World. We have a couple of episodes about them. And how many relationships have you had? So
including the holiday romance that turned into sort of like a 6 month thing, that would have been my, I'd say, fourth, to be honest.
Okay, amazing. And how often would you say that you go on dates?
I don't really go on dates. That's a weird thing.
You're not a dater.
I don't know. I just don't really. I mean, I'm sure there's some maybe other gay guys listening, but I don't know. It's a bit weird to date. I don't know. Especially with Grindr and everything, it's kind of taken the romance out of dating, I think.
Yeah, especially in London. And you know what? We've had so many gay guys come on the podcast as a guest, and a lot of you often say the same thing. It's just I don't know. It's just a different sort of culture to straight dating. Yeah.
Yeah. I think so. It's a bit sad, really, but I think yeah, sort of gone are the days where you would actually just meet someone like organically in a bar. I mean, obviously that still happens, but it's more rare.
Especially in COVID times when we can't go
I
to
mean,
bars.
yeah, definitely that doesn't help at all.
And our last question is, so I used to only ask this, what's the best thing about being in a relationship, to people who weren't single, but I think we should ask, what is the best thing about being single? Because being single can be really incredible and really amazing, and some people prefer it. So what is the best thing for you about being single?
I think the best thing is actually just it gives you that the chance to just be a bit more independent and learn to be happy individually. And it sounds a bit wanky, but I think, when you're looking for a partner, or you maybe in a relationship, you can become a little bit dependent, or just forget what's important to be on your. It is important to be happy from within, right? So.
Yeah, definitely. And not use people as a crutch and stuff, and be able to support yourself
Exactly.
if things go wrong, because if things do go tits up and you're left to pick up the pieces on your own, it can be a bit of a shit show. So
100%. I think that's what the my last the holiday romance. He's actually Brazilian. He's from Brazil, living in Lisbon. That's why it was long distance. And he
Wow.
said something that was very wise, I thought. And he was like, we need to learn to be our own tree. Don't lean on the other branches of someone else, and just be your own independent tree. Is very wise, I thought.
I love that. That's such a nice quote.
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, that's our speed date round done. So everyone out there listening can have a better idea. Thank God it's over. A better idea of who Luke is, and sort of what you're doing on the podcast. And I thought now for our story time segment of the podcast, you could tell us the story of how and when you discovered that you had HIV, as much as you're comfortable telling, obviously, and then we can sort of get into some questions, some listener questions, and some just thought-provoking questions in our left on red question round, which is named aptly so because being left on red just makes you question your universe and question your surroundings and question everything about yourself. So, we'll have some insightful questions there. But yeah, if you wanted to sort of tell us a bit about how, you discovered that you had HIV and the repercussions and stuff there, that would be really, really great.
Yeah. So basically, I was at university. I was in my final year in 2011, and I just basically had an accident. I suppose, or not an accident, but it was like a risky situation where I slept with someone, and that kind of risk, that kind of situation, just sort of. At the time, I knew that was risky behavior, but I just sort of put it to the back of my head and kind of just forgot about it, because I didn't at the time know that there was anything that I could have done to help myself. Probably because of the lack of education growing up, and lack of sex education, and especially LGBTQ awareness. So I just sort of kind of put that situation to the back of my mind, and pretended and hoped that nothing would have come from it, and that was it. I just sort of carried on, and then literally 3 weeks later, I did a half marathon, and the morning of the half marathon, I was really ill. I started to feel really ill, and I just thought, oh no, not today! This is the day I've been training for months, just typical. And anyway, I forced myself into the run, and it was raining and windy and horrible day as well. So at the end of the run, I kind of got through it and pushed myself, and then just basically was so ill after that. It was really very strange. I think I completely pushed myself to my limits when even on top of feeling ill.
For sure. And I guess doing a marathon as well, it's normal to feel quite knackered and stuff. So you probably didn't really overthink it or anything. Yeah.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And it does actually, intense exercise does actually temporarily lower your immune system anyway. So that's quite normal. And then obviously I was ill, so it kind of made things worse. And what happened was I ended up going to hospital just to see what was wrong, because I had some lumps on my neck and in my armpits and in my groin, and these were the lymph nodes, which is a sign that there's some kind of infection, or the immune system's kind of doing overload. And I went to hospital, and they didn't really know what was happened. It took them a long time to even sort of work it out basically. But what was happening was a seroconversion of the body. It's where basically the virus runs wild in the body, and the immune system has this crazy response, which it doesn't really know what's happening, and it becomes suppressed for a period, and the virus kind of viral load is very, very high. And I was going through that process. It's called seroconversion, and sort of after a couple of hours, definitely a few hours of being in hospital, the nurse, one of the nurses came up to me and actually said, "Oh, can I ask you a few questions about your sexual health?" And at that point in my knowing what had happened a few weeks earlier, it's kind of my heart skipped a beat.
Yeah, you can feel your stomach drop. My stomach dropped when you just said that.
Yeah, that was, so I kind of knew, but again, just hope that that couldn't be me. And then they sent me home. So I think kind of they took some blood tests, obviously. They asked me if I had sex with men and all of that. So and which I thought was a very leading question, but I was just like, ugh. So then I went home. They sent me home. I went home and started to feel better over the next couple of days. And I think 2 or 3 days later, I can never remember whether it was 2 or 3, but they rang me at home. I was in my student halls, third year student house, and I got the phone call, and the doctor told me that I was positive.
Wow.
And that was just, it was, I'll never sort of forget that moment. I was staring out, looking onto the road, and my friend just pulled up in a car, and she came in, and I was on the phone, and just, she came to she was there at that moment. It was a very close friend.
Yeah.
And I told her, and neither of us knew what that meant. Like, we were both terrified, actually, because neither of us had that in our vocabulary or understanding of what that actually meant.
For sure. And there's so much information out there on the internet that, telling you different things, and there's forums and there's government websites and there's all this, and you're sort of reading it like, where do you even start with educating yourself that once you've just heard something like that,
Yeah. So obviously at that moment, there is information out there. There was information out there, but it just wasn't widely available or widely known, I suppose. It was available. Just you didn't know necessarily how to get to that information. And at that moment, I think the harsh reality of the situation was that I thought I was going to die, and it was very traumatic, to be honest. And one thing that It's a Sin, the show, made me actually reflect on was my initial thought, which I've always known for the last 10 years, literally, that my initial thought was, how can my parents see me die? And that was just something that I had kind of, I knew that had been my first thought, but I hadn't actually reflected on that. And there is this amazing speech at the end of It's a Sin. Sorry if this is a spoiler for anyone, but she talks about shame and gay shame, and how the characters in the show, they experience. They grow up in a homophobic world, basically, where they tell them, they feel shameful for being gay every single day of their lives. And then, of course, they get this illness, and it's just it's their just reward for being gay.
And it just justifies all of that hate and all of those horrible things that they've felt about themselves their whole lives because of what society's impinged on them. It's just so convenient for all the people that perpetuate that hate every day. It's such a convenient disease that's targeting the people that they believe are somehow doing the wrong thing or whatever they believe.
Exactly, and that. So this is kind of. For me, watching this on the show was literally like a mirror to my 21-year-old self, because that is how I felt. I felt, the fact that the first thought that came through my mind was, how are my parents going to see me die, rather than I'm going to die, So this is a really interesting reflection for me, and really made me want to unpack that and really get into that shame and understand why I was keeping it a secret. But to answer the question, which is about information, was I had to educate myself, really, and like you said, there was information around, so I had to then seek it out and find it and understand that actually there is medication for HIV today and back in 2011. And although things have changed in the last 10 years, even then it was still a completely manageable illness. And
it's weird to think that in It's a Sin, that's 1980, 1990.
Yep.
That's only 30, 40 years ago. Like, it's not even that long ago. So, for 10 years to go by, the amount that things must have changed between now and then, it sort of just goes to show how much it has changed in 40 years. But that level of shame and that stigma is clearly still there, if that's, how you were feeling when you found
100%.
out.
100%. And yeah, I think even in the last 10 years, things have changed, attitudes have changed, and also medical advice has changed. But the medication hasn't really changed that much. So, it could, if we'd known about these things a bit more widely, you could have saved me a lot of trauma, and in thinking A, that I was going to die, and B, that I would never be able to have sex again, and all of these things, which I had to sort of discover myself. And actually, it's important to mention actually one big discovery that I did learn was that this course of treatment called PEP was available actually when I got diagnosed, PEP. Which stands for post-exposure prophylaxis, and which just basically means that if you have had a sort of a risky situation, you can actually go to a clinic the next morning and take a course of medicine for I think 1 month. And it can actually stop the virus from taking hold in the body. So that was available at the time, and that could have helped save my diagnosis. So and still available now.
Yeah, that's really, really important for everyone out there listening to know as well. So I'll put a link in the episode description with a bit more info and stuff about that. If you can give me some good sources and stuff, that would be super helpful. But I was going to ask, do you think that that gay shame sort of contributes to the lack of education that people are getting, even in high school and stuff, or when people are sort of discovering their sexuality? Like, why is there such a gap in the education in this?
Well, I think it definitely I don't think it's because of gay shame. I think gay shame is a result of the ignorance. I think the reason actually is because of homophobia, and that is deeply rooted in our society and policy. For example, I grew up under Section 28, which is a law that Margaret Thatcher passed in 1988, saying that homosexuality was not to be spoke about in schools, in state schools, which is what I went to. And so that was released in 2003. So I would have been 13, and of course the policy was the law was changed, but I don't think the curriculums were updated anytime overnight. So certainly in all of my education, I was never told about anything LGBT related.
Yeah, and I guess anything that you did here would have probably come from, whether it came from parents or people older than you who were growing up and were our age during the 80s and 90s when they were taught that HIV and AIDS was a death sentence, because that's how they could stop people dying from it without a cure at the time. So I guess if that archaic education is just filtering down, then that's all people have access to, unless you do proper research, but you're not encouraged to do so.
No, absolutely not. And I think the only time I'd ever heard of HIV growing up was basically that the gay disease that sort of rattled through New York in the 80s and killed loads of gay men. And also on comic relief, like World AIDS Day and stuff like that, where, you just think it's purely an African problem and people are dying of AIDS. So you really just don't think that it could happen to you, and that you're growing up I was growing up in the northeast of England, a little rural town, and I went to university in Newcastle, which is where I was diagnosed. You would never have believed that. Even though I knew what I'd done was risky, I basically had sex without a condom. I knew it was risky, but at the same time, I just didn't think it could happen to me.
Yeah, and I've definitely been there with friends that are gay, and they've been in the same situation, had sex without a condom, and we're on Google, we're like, it's only 0.7% of people in England, and we're trying to do the maths and stuff, and you never think that it will happen to you, because it is nowadays a lower chance. But I mean, that the thing is, there's still 101,000 people or so that are living with HIV, so it is still a risk that's out there.
Yeah, and out of those 101, I think a lot of them are actually on medication now and undetectable. which is great. Which undetectable, if people don't know, means literally the amount of virus in the blood is actually undetectable by a machine. So it means that it's so low that you basically cannot pass it on at all, and that's a fact. So we can't scream that loud enough, really, because that really does take the sting out of all of the stigma. It just kills it, because it's like, can't pass it on.
And if you knew that when you found out your diagnosis as well, if that's something that was widely known, you could have saved you so much trauma from, all the thoughts that went you through your head when you found out.
So that's one thing that actually sort of has evolved in the last 10 years. Back when I was diagnosed, it wasn't official. That wasn't a fact. The research hadn't been conducted when I was diagnosed. So there was always a chance that you'd pass it on, even if you were even if you were taking effective medication. So there's some things that have changed in the time since I've been diagnosed, which has kind of really helped me, and also go a long way in helping the fight against stigma.
For sure. And it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see in the next 10 years and then the next 10 years, the developments there and stuff as well. I mean, if we're already at a level where undetectable means untransmissible, then it'll be interesting to see how far they can go.
And of course, on that note, there's also, so I mentioned PEP before, and now in the last 5 years, they developed a new course of treatment called PrEP, which means pre-exposure prophylaxis. And obviously that means that you can take the course of treatment prior to having sex, or like just regularly, and it can actually stop you from getting HIV altogether. So there's like lots of things that even a negative person can do to protect themselves now, as well as obviously wearing a condom.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll definitely include a link in the episode description as well for everyone listening if you want to learn more about PrEP and PEP as well. Yeah, I'll make sure that we've linked everything. But so thank you so much for sharing your story of how you discovered that you were HIV positive. I think a lot of people out there, it would have been really moving for them to hear it. I know it was for me. So we've got a few questions from listeners. So I did a few Instagram polls and that kind of thing this week to see what people, actually wanted to know speaking to someone with HIV, because I think even if you did know someone who had HIV, you may not know that they were positive. That it may be that they've never told you. So I think a lot of people are really interested to know from the horse's mouth sort of more about the disease and how it affects you. So our first question is, what are the main issues people with HIV face? So this includes like health-wise and socially. So how it affects, your social circles, and then, just your general well-being.
Yeah. So like, I think from a medical perspective nowadays, there's very, very little issue really, in terms of health, because the medication is so effective now that you can take, in most cases, you can take one pill a day, and that will literally lower your viral load to an undetectable level, which firstly means your health is just as it was, and you live a long and healthy life, just like all your negative counterparts. And secondly, it means that you can't pass on the virus, so it really means that you're not putting others at risk, and you don't have that stress, and you don't have that fear of sex, which I did initially, and things are different now. Like when I was diagnosed, they didn't want you to go on medication straight away, because everything was a little bit different. The guidelines were stay off medication as long as you can. We don't want you to have the side effects of the medication and stuff, which was the guidelines at the time. But because the treatment has evolved, nowadays they just put you on treatment straight away. There's hardly any side effects for a lot of people, and you can live a healthy life, and it kind of gives you peace of mind that you're not going to pass it on.
Yeah, and I think that peace of mind is so important as well. Just like living with the disease mentally is obviously can be quite challenging. As you said, when you were 21, when you found out, you went through a lot of trauma and a huge discovery about what that meant for you. So I think that peace of mind is really important.
I think adding to that, so like from a medical perspective, it's kind of fine, but HIV really is, in Western countries where we have medication, it's kind of evolved into a mental illness rather than a physical illness, because the shame really is still there. And this fear and shame comes from, from the fear that was spread in the 80s around the disease, I think as a result of the homophobia. And that, like you said, is what that is in the recollections of our parents' generation who lived through it. And that's all we hear about. There's never really been a full-on follow-up story by the media to say, no, it's actually okay. We have PrEP now. There's PEP if you've had a problem. The medication is amazing. You can't pass it on. There's never really been a huge push to kind of really push to destigmatize this. Again, I think probably because it's still seen as a gay disease, which is, it's just the gays, they can get on with it. I think if it was a nationwide thing, affected everyone,
like COVID.
Like coronavirus, exactly, you'd be hearing a lot more about it. And I think it's really interesting to make the contrast between, stark difference between COVID and HIV,
Absolutely. And I think seeing in It's a Sin as well, when Richie's, prancing around telling everyone not to believe in the disease and it doesn't exist and everything, you can definitely see parallels. Like I know when it was all first starting last year with COVID, I was doing the exact same thing. Everyone's running around at work, just having a laugh. There's all memes going around about it and everything. And I think you can definitely see the parallels. But where there's not a parallel is how the government responded and how, people worked to educate each other and help each other rather than ostracize, certain communities like they did with the HIV and AIDS crisis back in the 80s. It's, it was sort of everyone together, whereas this is different. And when people think about, global pandemics, that people are thinking back to the Spanish flu as the most recent case of something like this happening, when really the AIDS crisis in the 80s is only, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, of course. And it's still going on. I think last year there was 800,000 people died of AIDS in the world.
Wow.
And that was just last year. So this is a figure that's sort of similar every year. And it isn't really dissimilar to the amount of people who've died of COVID last year. So
no, yeah.
It's actually scary to think now it obviously doesn't, it's more affected in countries where they can't afford the treatment or where it's actually homosexuality is illegal. That's an interesting statistic that where it's illegal to be gay, the likelihood of you dying from AIDS is so much higher in a country where it's actually legal, ironically.
Wow, yeah. And I guess you wouldn't be going to your doctor with these symptoms if you sort of had an idea of where it had come from. It just goes back to the 80s when they're, sort of feeling that gay shame and not it, when Richie goes in It's a Sin to the doctor and uses a fake name. So
yeah, exactly. And I mean, people still use fake names even today. I have friends, not many friends. I don't know many people who are HIV positive because, even within the gay community, we don't really talk about it that much. But I do have one friend and he uses a fake name because he doesn't feel comfortable, revealing that information about himself. He's not ready for the world to know about it. The stigma is real. The Terrence Higgins Trust did a poll last year in 2019, and it showed that 45% of people wouldn't kiss someone with HIV, and then another third wouldn't go on a date with someone with HIV. Yeah,
which is just wild. So I guess that sort of goes to show the social impact that it has. And, I guess mentally hiding away is sort of, going back to how a lot of gay people might feel before they came out and feeling like you can't be yourself and be honest with people and the people you love. But just that social those statistics, would make people probably more reluctant to, come out and reveal their HIV status as well, because it just all contributes to that gay shame.
Yeah, definitely.
So our next question was, how has being HIV positive impacted your dating life since you found out? So obviously it's been 10 years and I'm sure it's been a roller coaster since then, because dating in your 20s is, all about our sexual discovery and exploration and sort of figuring yourself out. But how has it impacted your dating life?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, the initial, when I was diagnosed in 2011, they advised me not to go on medication for several reasons. And that's now changed. So I just like to point that out. But back then, obviously, I wasn't on medication. So I was a little bit more immunosuppressed. I was getting colds and flus and shingles and Bell's palsy and little complications like this. So it was a bit of a stress to deal with my own health. And on top of this, obviously you are contagious. So you have to be really, really careful with who you sleep with and obviously, and really you have to tell people back when you have that, when there's that risk. And it was really terrifying for me back then to meet anyone, to be honest, and what their reaction was. So I was kind of terrified of having sex for a while. And I actually met my first proper boyfriend, and he was amazing. I told him after 4 weeks of not doing anything, at which point he was like, why have we not done anything yet? But I kind of told him in the end, and I will always be grateful to him because he was amazing, and kind of saw it as a strength rather than a weakness, and I thought that was amazing.
Wow.
And we worked through it, and back then PrEP didn't exist, so obviously it was really challenging, and he embraced it, and it just made me like him even more. So that was amazing.
Yeah, he seems like a really incredible person. I guess that's the kind of, that sounds like exactly what you needed at the time to sort
Absolutely.
of have someone have confidence in you and go through that with someone, as a team and stuff. Because that's like any relationship you should approach things as a team because.
Absolutely. Yeah. He was amazing. And, I know that other people haven't been as fortunate in the past when things were a little bit different.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But obviously, that was great for me. And then that relationship ended, and I came out a lot more confident because obviously he gave me confidence, really. And then as a result, as the years go by, things. I think first thing that happened was U equals U was information that they released, which was like you mentioned, it undetectable equals untransmittable, which again gave me complete peace of mind. Oh, finally, now this medication that I'm on. Oh, of course, I forgot to mention I actually went on medication, so that was a huge sort of peace of mind. And then in the first couple of years of being on medication, they weren't sure whether if it was 100% that I couldn't pass it on. But then after a couple of years, they released that data, which again was another a thing which was just amazing for me. And then of course, in the last 5 years, they released PrEP, and obviously that gives the HIV negative person opportunity to sort of doubly cover themselves. So it's been, and that's come available only in 2019 on the NHS. So that's fantastic. It's a fantastic thing for all gay men, really. And I say gay men, but it's for anyone, really, because anyone is at a risk of catching HIV, and the statistics prove that. I think 45% of people who are living with HIV in the UK are heterosexual, or have caught it via heterosexual sex. So PrEP's an amazing resource, an amazing thing.
It is. It's amazing as well because it gives power back to people who, being gay and feeling marginalized, you might feel as though there's been a loss of power and you might feel a little bit out of control, especially someone who's living with HIV. It gives you a little bit of control and autonomy back over your own sex life and your own health and your own, way of life. And
I couldn't agree more. And that's one of the huge, amazing things that has happened recently. But it wasn't easy. Even PrEP, I think they had to take the government to charities had to take the government to court to even get that passed.
Jesus.
Because again, it's a constant struggle. It's a constant battle. That which is, I think, is buried in stigma and homophobia, to be honest.
For sure. And in saying that, going back to the stigma conversation, do you think, so this was a question from one of my gay friends, do you think that the gay community contributes to perpetuating the stigma as much as the cis community? So I guess, just thinking back to any friends that you have that are gay or people you've dated or even yourself, how do you think the gay community contributes to that as well as the wider community?
I think they have done. I think the gay community are more aware nowadays. I think basically all of my gay friends know about PrEP and PEP, and they also know a lot of people know what undetectable means, and also that undetectable equals untransmittable. So these facts in itself are the cornerstone to killing stigma. So, and I think they're more widely known within the gay community, which is great. Having said that, over the years, I've been very private about it. I really felt it was a secret that I held on to, and I wasn't ready for the world to come out. So, but I have had it sort of leak out to a couple of people, and someone, throw it back in my face when I wasn't expecting it. And that was a bit of a huge shock. And I've also heard gay people, say, "Oh, don't go down there, you'll get AIDS," or just silly like remarks, which are not cool at all. And
for sure. And that's just the bottom of the pyramid, isn't it? It's the same with things like, toxic masculinity leading up to like rape culture, leading up to actual sexual assault. It's just those little comments that are normalized in certain circles, and then it all ladders up.
Well, exactly. And obviously back then I wasn't in a position to feel like I could speak out and tell people about that, because I just didn't want people to find out, so I just stayed silent, really.
So how do you feel now that you have been honest and open with the world about your HIV status?
It all sort of boils down to that speech that the character Jill gives in It's a Sin, and it's about the gay shame. And I think really when I thought about why aren't I talking about this? Why am I keeping it a secret? Because it's really everyone has sex. That's why we're all here. So I'm pretty much assuming that most people may have had. You don't even have to have risky sex. People can get it from being in loving relationships. It doesn't. So I really think the cause of catching HIV is nothing to be ashamed of either. And it's a really manageable illness now. I don't. It's way easier to manage than, for example, someone with diabetes. I'd if I had a choice, I'd rather have HIV because diabetes, you have to inject. It can be quite very serious. And so why if I had diabetes, I wouldn't be holding it a secret. So why was I holding this as a secret? It made me really think about it, and it is just sort of where it's because of the stigma, it's because of the shame around HIV. And like I said earlier, this is perpetuated by the homophobia that is embedded in the society. And I just was like, this little homophobe inside me was just holding on to this secret for like dear life. And I just suddenly thought, like, no, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna talk about it with my friend. I did it on an Instagram live. I just thought I'll do it in a public forum because if it helps other people, then okay, great. And obviously since I did, the reaction was mind blowing. But that in itself proves to me that it is something that people are still a bit shocked about, and it's a shocking thing that someone would come out about their HIV status even today, even with everything that I've just said, even the advances in technology.
Absolutely.
So it's definitely a conversation that people, is where people want to be educated by, and want to engage in. And I think, for me, it's just really, to answer your question fully, is like, it just feels like I'm not hiding anything anymore. And I was sort of 21 when I sort of started to tell people that I was gay, and within maybe 20 when I started to tell people that I was gay, like more openly. And by the time I was 21, I was diagnosed with HIV. So just as I started to open up to the world, I then had this other secret that I had to deal with, which I wasn't able to open up fully. And now after 10 years, it's just, I'm just able to talk about it.
Must be quite freeing.
So freeing. I think someone messaged me like a quote recently, and it's something like, the only thing that can hurt us is the things that we guard. So as a secret or something like this.
No, that's so true. It's sort of like the and it's the ideas that you create in your head and the situations you create in your head if it was to get out, and you spend so much time worrying about things that don't actually happen and aren't even real. Just the theoretical situations you make up in your head. And I guess you would have had all of those fears, but now that I'm sure there's some people that homophobic people that would have their own opinions, but the amount of people that I've seen that you've helped and that have reached out to you and praised you for like, giving them the strength to feel confident in themselves. And, like what David Furnish said to you on BBC, it's just incredible that, something like this, so many people are going through it, but they're going through it in silence and they don't have anyone to look to. Like they've got, information on Google, but there's even shows like It's a Sin. It shows the dark side and the scary side, but there's no one to look to for inspiration or support.
Yep.
So I think, what you've done is incredible. And,
Thanks,
I
mate.
think a lot of people would be really thankful that, you've come out and shared your story. And I think it's great as well when, someone like you can have influence and help people because, we're all kind of living the same weird experiences. And so if people can come out and be vulnerable, I think that's really powerful and really important.
I think it's worth saying is that I'm sitting in a place of privilege, right? Like that. And I felt that I could come out and talk about this, after 10 years, of course, it is a journey and, I don't think anyone is expected to come out straight away, but like I am in a place of privilege, the way that I look, my race, my gender, and the society that I live in. And I know that there's a lot of people who are not as privileged. And, that I think that's why it actually sort of resonated in a way.
For sure. And the thing is, the sad fact is that, it's, it's not sad. It's just a fact of life. People listen to, white men at the end of the day and attractive white men as well. And I think if you can, take that and harness it and use it to connect with people that just might need to hear it from someone who sort of, as David Furnish says, someone who's a robust and happy living example of what it's like to live with HIV nowadays. I think if you can be a source of inspiration for people, that's really incredible.
Yeah.
So I have a couple more questions. So knowing what you know now and the journey that you've been on, what would you say to your younger self if you could talk to him at 21?
Loads of change. And it's quite interesting that you said this because I actually basically did this the day after I did my Instagram live because someone messaged me the day after I did it saying, hi Luke, I just saw your video. I was diagnosed today. Thank you for me. Thanks for, doing the video. And we ended up having a conversation and I basically just told him everything that I would have told myself. And
oh my God.
Yeah, it was intense. It's been so many messages like this. It's been so intense, emotionally, but anyway, I just sort of told him it's your life's changed. You're going to have to take medication now every day for the rest of your life. But it really is no different to, girls who take the contraception pill or people who take vitamins every day. It's just something that we have to get used to.
Which is so incredible to think that 40 years ago, 30 years ago, you watch It's a Sin and you think that was the fate that people had to come to terms with. And I just think it's so amazing. And I'm to be honest, until I watched the show, until I saw your video, until I spoke to you about it and did some research, I didn't know that this was the state of it. And I think about 80% of people on my Instagram said that they didn't know that they didn't know, they weren't informed about HIV. And I just think it's so important.
I wasn't informed about HIV. I had to sort of find that information myself. And I think what's a huge honor for me is that people are listening to this conversation, and this is really helping get it out there that the status of the disease now, and that can save people a lot of trauma. Just hopefully this guy that I was speaking to on Instagram, who came out to me, who was diagnosed that day, and hopefully he won't experience as much heartache as what I had to sort of go through. And he knows that he's undetectable, that once he goes on medication, of course, which he's now started, his viral load will drop to a very low level, at which point he can't pass the virus on. It means his immune system will be super healthy and he won't have any effect on the relationships that he will have or whatever, and even casual relationships, So hopefully. Yeah. And he actually, what's funny, if he's listening, he'll laugh. He asked me, does the medication affect sunbeds? So, I mean, hopefully that is...
He can get his tan still.
Hopefully that is the biggest of his worries. He still can go on the sunbeds, by the way. So, yeah, that's not an issue. But...
wow, that's the best thing about it. I guess speaking again about people listening, what can people listening do to help? So if you've heard this and you've watched It's a Sin and you feel like you want to do something, what's the message that they can share, and what can they do to help?
Yeah, I think the main thing is firstly just like maybe learning a bit about it, because like I said, that Terrence Higgins Trust survey, it gave really terrifying results, really, that the stigma still exists. And I think the best thing that we can do in terms of education is really just understand that you equals you. You can't pass it on if you're on effective treatment. The second thing is know about PrEP, which the government have just invested something like 2 billion moving forward about the release of more medication, and people are campaigning to get it more freely available, so it's not just in sexual health clinics. But yeah, so know about PrEP. If you are sexually active, that's something that you can do, and I think they're the two things that really help destigmatize HIV.
Yeah,
to be honest.
And I think they're really good actionable things as well. Like they're things people can actually go out there and do. So if you are listening, just remember you can always go and educate yourself, and then I guess educate your friends as well. And
and it's like you said, like also if you hear those side comments, like just you don't always have to do it in the moment, but you can always tell someone later, oh, by the way, that comment that you said, it's not true, or whatever, it's not cool. And
I guess as well, it's all about learning together, because someone might not know that what they're saying is offensive, and I've been trying so hard this whole podcast to try and use the right language and everything, but we said before the call we're just going to do our best, and that's all anyone can do. So it doesn't even have to be an awkward conversation stamping out comments like that. You can just have like a casual chat with your friend and sort of say that sort of stuff is what is contributing to this overall problem. It doesn't have to be self-righteous, like you can't say that type of conversation.
For sure.
And I guess, so our next question is, our second last question is, what can the government do to help? So I know you just said they've invested something mental like £2 billion towards PrEP. Can you tell us more about that? And then what you think that they can do to help moving forward?
Yes, they put a lot of money into rolling it out and make it more available. But I think at the moment it is still only available in gum clinics, which aren't always the nicest of places. I'm sure we know that. So one amazing thing would be to do is if they did get it available into GPs and pharmacists, places where people can go and get it easily. So that's one thing that they could do. Another thing is HIV still exists in policy. Like for example, if you are HIV positive, you can't join the army even now, or the armed services. So I really just don't see why that is something that still exists in policy.
Is it still an issue trying to get a home loan? Like in It's a Sin, when Richie's trying to get a home loan to buy his house, is that still an issue?
I actually, don't quote me on that one because I don't know the official answer, but I haven't heard about that one recently. I haven't tried to get a home loan either. So.
Okay, we can scrub that question out, though. I was just genuinely curious, because I did read on NHS website yesterday that it says you may have issues getting a loan.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, that's interesting.
Yeah, but I'll just edit this part out.
You don't even have to edit it out. That's such an interesting thing that people right, that's crazy. I mean, like I said, I haven't tried to get a home loan, so yet.
Yeah. Well, keep us posted on how you go.
Another thing the government can do is improve online testing, because actually at the moment that's only available nationwide during testing week, National Testing Week. And obviously, I think in London it does depend. I mean, currently it depends on whether the borough that you live in wants to pay for it. In London, they choose to do that. But I think nationwide, that's not. The other boroughs in other parts of the country don't pit double. I know that they don't do it. So one thing that I think should be like synonymous across the country is that online tests should be available, because it's just like COVID,
I'm really surprised at that, I think
It's mad, isn't it?
Yeah, every time I've gone to get an STD test or just do the home, like the finger prick one or whatever, it's all but I've always lived in London, so I wouldn't know any different. But that's actually really surprising to me that that's not nationwide.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I got diagnosed in Newcastle. Terrence Higgins Trust think that there's it's like a rough figure, but I think 7,000 people who are around who are positive and not on treatment, so very contagious. So those 7,000 people could be anywhere. And really it's important that we all have access to testing. Yeah, testing is obviously, and like I said, like I was going to say, is it's just like when we think about it in COVID terms, that's all they talk about, isn't it? Testing. Make sure you know your status. If you're positive, stay at home. If you're negative, then great. And it's the same with HIV. If you are positive and you go on treatment and then you become undetectable, you can't pass it on. If you're negative, then great. But knowing is so key, and I think that's the main thing that everyone can do.
Yeah, and I think knowing is so key to stopping the spread. Like that's the same. It's the same with COVID. If people know, then they can take action to stop the spread. And I mean, eventually, you'd hope it can get stamped out. But I think if people don't have access to testing, and as you said, there's 7,000 people out there that don't know. I mean, it's inevitable that it's going to continue.
And that's another thing for the general public to do is, if you have a doubt, like, and you haven't been tested for a while, just get a test and then know. And I think there's so much shame about this virus that people are actually even scared to know. And, just hopefully if people are listening to this, they can understand that, it isn't the end of the world anymore. And it's so much better if you know about your status, because you can help yourself go on medication and you can help other people by not passing it on. And one other thing that the government could do to help is improve the NHS testing, not just online, but also they could make it like an opt-out service. At the minute it's opt-in, you have to ask for a HIV test. If they asked everyone as standard, then that would basically find so many more people who are positive in the system, who probably would have fallen through the system otherwise. Yeah. Because it does affect people who are sort of out of the kind of specific expected categories. I know that the Elton John AIDS Foundation did like a pilot. I don't know what it's like, a trial thing that they did in hospitals in Southeast London, and they basically paid the hospital if they found someone who's positive, and it was a lot of money, like £150,000 or something. So for every positive, so it was a huge amount of money. So the hospital took the risk and tested everyone, and they found something ridiculous like 150 people, and including an 88-year-old woman who was living with HIV and undiagnosed. So it's unbelievable that...
Oh, my God. So she's just gone through her whole life just, shagging everyone.
Exactly. I don't know how the hell she got it, but I mean, there you go. It's crazy. So that's another thing.
Yeah, she could have had it for the last, 30 or 40 years, and it's just never...
I mean, you'd probably expect her to have had it only for between 10 years, I would say, because it does catch up with you, obviously, if you don't
Does it always develop into AIDS if it's untreated, or is it just a risk?
I think most cases it does. I think there's again, I'm not a scientist.
Yeah, no, it's okay. We'll just caveat that just a caveat to everyone listening. Luke's not a scientist.
I mean, I think so. Every time it pretty much does catch up with you. It just depends on how good your immune system is at dealing with it. Some people can last quite a long, up to 15 years before they start getting ill, and other people go, it's only a few years, 3 or 4 years before they start. The immune system really weakens with it. But there are a couple of there is a pool of people who they believe are kind of in some way immune to HIV. They can be positive, show positive on a test, but they actually don't. They have such a small amount of virus in their blood that they actually can live normal, and they don't pass it on either.
Interesting.
And they just found one.
Yeah, I heard something a few years ago, and just a caveat, I'm also not a scientist, but have you heard anything about the person who had HIV and was living with it and then ended up getting leukemia and had a bone marrow transplant to sort of try and combat the leukemia? And then once they had the transplant, they had their HIV, I guess it would be what you're talking
Cured.
about, the detectable viral level was cured. Yeah. Have
Yeah,
you heard
I think
that?
yeah, there was that case, and then there was the case in this I think they call it the San Francisco patient, and they found that these people do exist who have this gene which basically controls the virus, and just recently they found one in it was just on the news recently. I think it was Brazil. They found someone, and and it's amazing. It means it sort of just means scientists can like look into these patients and try and really understand how their bodies are able to deal with it, and that can really help with research into eventually finding a cure.
For sure. And I guess that goes into, again, it's exciting to think about what they're going to accomplish over the next 10 years, if it's changed even a little bit in the last 10 years, but so much since when it first started in the 80s. You know, it's just exciting to see where it's going to go.
There's even talk now of medication being reduced to like an injection, which you could take once a month.
Wow. Yeah, that's really exciting. And I guess as well, what someone was saying to me, I mean, this is kind of a conspiracy theory type thing, is how they've managed to develop the COVID vaccine so quickly over the last year. But it's because there's so many people that are piling money into it that scientists are able to work at higher speeds and pay for testing and pay for all these different things that help a vaccine to get approved. So I guess it's just interesting that they say why can't other diseases be cured as quickly? But I guess it's just because money's not being poured into it in the same way when with something like COVID gets that much publicity. You know, something like HIV and AIDS is brushed under the rug. Like maybe it doesn't have as much financial support to be able to do those tests. So I guess it does take longer. But I mean, you'd hope that they will get there eventually.
Hopefully, I think sort of we covered that a bit earlier, and I think there is a lot to be said about why there isn't the focus on HIV. But I mean, like, I think in general, I can't complain, you know, like the medication saves my life every day. So it's great. But and people, there are people working on it eventually, and I think probably within my lifetime they will come up with a cure. Fingers crossed.
I have one more question, just because we've taken an hour, which it's been amazing. So this is my longest podcast I've ever done, actually.
Really?
But this is my longest one. But I think it's so interesting. I love learning about this stuff, and I think everyone listening is going to find it super interesting. Amazing. But so what would you say to anyone listening that is currently living with HIV or has been recently diagnosed?
Yeah, so I mean, it like I said, you know, it is a livable disease. You know, life's going to change for you. You have to take a pill a day, but there's so much information out there that you are part of something. You're not the only one suffering, and you know, I think it is an important question, Maddie, because it's not just gay men. You know, I was contacted by straight women, straight men who are living with this, and I think within the gay community, it is becoming what more people are knowing more about HIV and the steps to take to reduce the stigma. But people within the straight community and even further afield, people contacted me from India and Egypt, where it's actually illegal to be gay, and they have to go undercover every month to pick up their medication. You know, it really is. I mean, it's just still a problem with the stigma and the shame. And I think the best thing I can do is, you know, we have these amazing resources now available, which I didn't even have in the last 10 years. Things like just social media is an amazing tool, and there's so many people that you can connect with who are able to help and coach and just be inspired by. And on top of that, the Terrence Higgins Trust are there to help everybody, and they provide amazing services to help individuals living with HIV.
Wonderful. And I can link all of that in the episode description as well. So just to make sure if anyone is listening and you are currently living with HIV or you've been recently diagnosed, I'll make sure all those resources are there.
Amazing.
So that is all of our questions. And Luke, you've been an amazing guest, one of the most interesting guests that I've ever had on the podcast. And I feel very privileged that you have come on to share your story with me and everyone else listening.
No worries. Thank you, Maddie. It's been amazing. And thank you for continuing this conversation and helping me amplify my voice, which I had been silenced for 10 years. So it's great that you're there to help and spread the message. Thank you.
Yeah, and I feel, really privileged to be able to do so. And last thing, if you haven't watched It's a Sin yet, it broke loads of records on Channel 4. It's an incredible show, and it will give you a bit more of an insight to, just the way that queer people were treated back then and, the brutal reality of the AIDS epidemic. So go and check it out. And,
Also, Maddie, you're Aussie, I take.
Yes, yeah.
There's an amazing Australian film called Holding the Man. Have you heard of it?
No, I haven't heard of it.
It's an amazing film. It's kind of about this. It's a very similar story to It's a Sin, but it's obviously a film. It was shot in 2015, and it's beautifully shot. And it's about how it's a similar story to It's a Sin, but how it was how it affected in Sydney. In the 80s, and it's actually an autobiographical piece, which makes it so beautiful. The story is told by the actual main character in the show. He actually goes on to be a writer, and he writes this story, which is basically about his life with his partner and how they dealt with the whole epidemic. So it's absolutely amazing.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, thank you for the recommendation, and I'll put a link to there in the episode description as well. This episode description is so juicy, full of links. So
like an essay.
Yeah, a bit of an essay, a bit of a dissertation. Thank you so much for joining the show, Luke, and I'll chat to you soon.
No worries. Thanks for that, Maddie.
I hope you enjoyed my chat with Luke. Please let me know if you have any thoughts or stories of your own to share through my Instagram. It's @madsworld.mp3 or through my website. It's madsworld.co. Love and elbow taps. Peace.